I want to be honest with you guys about something before I even start telling this part of the story. Because if I don't say this first, none of the rest of it makes sense. I thought I was a good man, not a perfect man. I never had that delusion. But a good one, the kind who shows up, who provides, who doesn't cheat, doesn't lie, doesn't run. I paid every bill on time. I ran a company that employed over 400 people. I built a home with every material comfort 3 little girls could ever want. And I told myself, for 4 solid years after Anna died, that those things were enough. That being the engine was the same as being present. That keeping the machine running was the same as being a father. It took Diane walking back through my front door. My front door, not the service entrance. I want to be specific about that because I still think about it. For me to realize just how wrong I'd been about almost everything. But this story isn't just about Diane coming back. It's about what happened after. And I'll tell you right now, what happened after was the kind of thing that changes the shape of a person permanently. Not dramatically. Not in a movie way. In the quiet, restructuring, cellular level way that real life does when it finally decides to show you what it's made of. It started on a Tuesday morning, about 3 weeks after Diane had been back in the house. The girls were at school. The house had that specific morning quiet it gets after everyone leaves. Not empty, just resting, like it's taking a breath before the afternoon arrives. I was in my home office going through emails when my phone rang. It was Marcus Webb, my CFO, and when Marcus calls before 9 in the morning, it's never good news. The man is constitutionally incapable of bad news after noon. Something about daylight makes him cautious. "Ryan," he said, and I could hear the particular tightness in his voice. The one he uses when he's choosing his words like someone diffusing something. "We got a call from Vantage Capital in Zurich this morning, from their legal team." I put my coffee down. "They're saying they have a consulting contract that was signed in our name," Marcus continued, "with a recommendation letter from you attached. Apparently the consultant they hired based on that documentation delivered nothing over 6 months and walked away with a significant retainer. They want to understand our exposure before they decide how to proceed." I sat very still for a second, the kind of still where your brain is running at full speed but your body just stops cooperating. "Marcus," I said, "I have never signed a consulting contract with Vantage Capital." "I know," he said. "That's why I'm calling." The name came to me before he even said it. I don't know how to explain that. It was like my body knew before my mind caught up. It was the same feeling I'd had the night I sat in this same office watching the security footage, watching Camille's hand reach into that glass case. That cold, sinking recognition, not surprise. Something worse than surprise. The feeling of confirming something you'd been trying very hard not to already know. "Send me everything they sent you," I said. "Every document. Don't respond to them yet." I hung up and sat there for a moment with the phone face down on the desk and my hands flat on either side of it, like I was trying to hold the surface of things in place. Outside the window, the gardener was trimming the hedges with the slow, methodical patience of someone who has no idea that 12 feet away, in a room that looks perfectly calm from the outside, a man is trying to figure out how deep a hole someone has dug for him. The documents came through 20 minutes later. I printed them out, all 14 pages, and read them at the kitchen table because I couldn't sit in that office anymore. Something about the formality of it, the desk and the framed degrees and the view I'd chosen specifically because it was impressive, felt wrong for what I was reading. The letterhead on the recommendation letter had my name, my title, my company. The signature at the bottom looked enough like mine that I stared at it for a full minute before I was certain it wasn't. It was close. Very close. The kind of close that tells you someone studied your signature for a while before they tried to replicate it. But the thing that made my stomach actually drop, the thing I wasn't prepared for, was the date on the contract. It was dated 4 months ago, which meant Camille had been building this while we were still together. While she was sitting at my dinner table, while she was watching my daughters, while she was playing the role of the composed, deliberate woman who just wanted to be part of something real. She'd been setting this up in the background the whole time. The brooch, the logs, framing Diane. That wasn't just jealousy and pettiness. That was one piece of something bigger. She'd been working me the entire time. and I'd been too busy running a machine to notice. I called my attorney, Daniel Park, at 9:43. Daniel has this quality I've always appreciated. He doesn't react, not visibly. You can tell him that your house is on fire and he'll say, "Describe the fire," in exactly the same tone he uses to ask what you want for lunch. I used to think it was coldness. Now I understand it's a form of respect. He's not going to panic for you, so you don't have to hold his panic and yours at the same time. "Tell me everything," he said. So I did. I walked him through Marcus's call, the documents, the dates, the signature. I told him about Camille. I told him about the brooch and the logs and Diane and the whole sequence of it. All of it. The real version. Not the polished, edited version I'd been carrying in my head like a shame I wasn't ready to air. The full thing. It felt strange, saying it out loud in that order, because hearing it from outside my own head made it sound different. It sounded like a pattern. A deliberate, constructed, patient pattern with a beginning and a middle and an end that she'd planned and I hadn't seen coming at any step of it. Daniel was quiet for a moment when I finished. Then he said, "She used your name on a foreign investment contract while you were in a relationship and had access to your personal documents." He wasn't asking. He was assembling. "Yes," I said, "and this is verifiable. You have no record of any communication with Vantage Capital, no email, no call log, nothing?" "Nothing." "Okay." He said it the way you say okay when you mean I have everything I need. "Don't contact her. Don't discuss this with anyone outside your legal and financial teams. Give me until end of day." I agreed and hung up and stood in my own kitchen not knowing what to do with my hands. That's the thing nobody warns you about when something like this lands in your lap, the mundaneness of it. You get information that fundamentally reorganizes everything, and then you still have to figure out what to do until noon. The dishwasher needed to be emptied. Lily's Thursday session with Rebecca had to be confirmed. The grocery order hadn't gone through because I'd switched cards and forgotten to update the billing. Life just keeps asking you to participate in its regular programming while you're standing there trying to absorb the fact that someone spent months constructing a fraud in your name. I emptied the dishwasher. I confirmed Lily's session. I updated the billing information. And then I sat back down at the kitchen table with the 14 printed pages, and I read through them again. Slower this time. Because the first read had been about confirming what it was. The second read was about understanding what she'd thought this would become. The contract was for a 6-month strategic consulting engagement, framed around market entry for a mid-size American tech firm trying to break into the European logistics space. On paper, it was plausible. The kind of introduction that someone with my network could genuinely facilitate. The kind of thing that, if you received a letter of recommendation from Ryan Hartwell, you'd believe. You'd wire the retainer without blinking. And Camille, who'd spent 14 months learning exactly how my name worked, exactly what it opened, exactly what kind of doors it unlocked just by existing on a piece of paper, had understood that with a precision I found genuinely disturbing. She didn't hate me. That was the part that took me a while to sit with. People who hate you don't spend this long learning you. She'd studied me. Not because she loved me either. I was long past that particular consolation. She'd studied me the way a very patient, very intelligent person studies a resource they intend to use. I'd been infrastructure to her. I was a network and a name and a signature and a set of relationships that could be monetized if you were careful and quiet and willing to take your time. And the worst part, the part I had to be honest with myself about sitting at that kitchen table with the morning going pale and gray outside, was that I had made it so easy. I had been so checked out, so sealed behind that glass I'd built around myself after Anna died, so convinced that running the machine was the same as being alive, that I had left absolutely no part of myself present enough to notice. She hadn't outsmarted me. She'd just waited for me to be as absent as I always was. My phone buzzed. A text from Diane. "I made too much pasta last night. Bringing some over for the girls' lunch if that's okay." I looked at that message for a long moment. Something about the simplicity of it, the sheer ordinary, unremarkable, pasta-having normalcy of it, cracked something open in my chest that I hadn't even known was sealed shut. Because that's what Camille never understood and never could have understood. She was building toward something. Diane just made pasta. I typed back, "That's more than okay, thank you." And then I put the phone down, looked at those 14 pages one more time and made a decision. Not a loud decision. Loud. Not a dramatic one. Just a quiet, clear, fully formed decision, the kind that doesn't need a lot of ceremony because it's already finished by the time you notice you've made it. I was going to let Daniel do what Daniel does. I was going to let Vantage Capital do what they were going to do. And I was not going to lift a single finger to stop any of it. Not because I was angry. I was past angry. Anger is hot, and I was something much colder, much steadier. The kind of steady that comes when you've been fooled badly enough that you stop needing the satisfaction of reacting and start being comfortable with just watching what's coming arrive on its own schedule. The machine I'd built had a lot of teeth. I'd just never turned it in this direction before. By the time the girls got home at 3:30, Sophie carrying a drawing she'd made in art class that she declared was a sunset but with more orange than usual, Valentina eating chips directly from the bag with absolutely no apology for it, and Lily walking in last, quiet in the way she still sometimes was, but looking up at me with those eyes that had started to hold light in them again. I had already started to understand that whatever was coming for Camille wasn't something I needed to orchestrate. I just needed to get out of the way. Daniel called back at 6:14 that evening. The girls were upstairs. Diane had stayed for dinner, not because I'd asked her to, but because Valentina had grabbed her wrist the second she tried to leave and said, "You can't go, we're having pasta," with the absolute moral authority that only a 5-year-old can summon. And Diane had looked at me over the top of Valentina's head with that expression she has, the one that's half amused and half something warmer than that. And I'd shrugged and said, "The jury has spoken." So she stayed. And the 4 of them were upstairs doing something loud involving what sounded like every pillow in the house when my phone rang, and I stepped out onto the back porch and closed the door behind me. The evening air was that specific early fall temperature, where it's not cold enough to need a jacket but cold enough that you feel the difference on your face. I remember that detail because I remember standing there and feeling the air on my skin and thinking, this is real, this is happening, stay with it. I talked to Vantage's legal team, Daniel said, and then I talked to a forensic document specialist I use. Ryan, the signature on that contract is a forgery, not a sloppy one. Whoever did it practiced, but it won't hold up under analysis. The paper stock doesn't match anything your company uses. The digital metadata on the recommendation letter was created on a device that's never been registered to you or your firm, and there are 3 other red flags I won't bore you with right now. I leaned against the porch railing. What does Vantage want to do? They want to prosecute, he said. They're embarrassed. A firm like that doesn't wire a retainer to a consultant without vetting, and somebody in their organization failed to vet properly. They're angry at themselves and they want somewhere to put it. Camille Whitmore is somewhere to put it. I was quiet for a second. Then I asked the question that had been sitting in the back of my mind since Marcus's call that morning. Is this the first time she's done something like this? Daniel paused in a way that told me he'd already been looking into that. It's not, he said. I made some calls this afternoon. There's a pattern here that goes back further than you. Different cities, different men, same architecture. She finds someone with a name worth borrowing. She builds the relationship slowly. She creates something with their credentials and then she exits before it collapses. With you, something went sideways. She stayed longer than usual, moved faster than usual, and I think framing your housekeeper was her trying to eliminate something that made her feel unstable. She wasn't supposed to fall behind schedule. I stood there on that porch and I breathed in the cold air and I let that sit in my chest for a moment. Not the anger of it. I was still past anger. Just the shape of it. The specific geometry of being studied and used by someone who had done this before and would have done it again. Okay, I said. What do I need to do? Almost nothing, Daniel said. That's actually the part I need you to understand. Vantage is filing. The document specialist will provide testimony. I'll handle your end. What I need from you is a signed affidavit confirming you never entered into any agreement with them and never authorized use of your name or signature. That's it. After that, you step back and let the process work. I almost laughed. Step back and let the process work. 4 months ago, I had stepped back from everything and let every process work without me, and look where that had gotten me. But this was different. This was stepping back because the thing in motion was already pointed in the right direction. This was the specific and unfamiliar relief of not being the one who has to fix it. "I'll have the affidavit to you by morning," I said. "Good." He paused. "How are the girls?" Daniel Park had never once in 9 years of working together asked me how the girls were. I think I stood there for 2 full seconds before I answered. "Better," I said, "They're actually better." He said good again, and this time it sounded like he meant it differently. I stood on the porch for another few minutes after we hung up, just listening to the sounds coming through the glass door behind me. There was a shriek that was definitely Valentina, a laugh that was definitely Sophie, and underneath it, quieter but there, the sound of Lily's voice saying something I couldn't make out but that existed, that was present, that was filling the air like it belonged there. 3 weeks ago, that same voice had been completely silent. I don't think I'll ever take the sound of it for granted again. I went back inside. Diane was sitting on the floor of the living room with all 3 of them, and they'd built something out of the couch cushions that I can only describe as an architectural disaster held together entirely by ambition. Sophie was explaining the structural logic of it with the focused intensity of a tiny engineer. Valentina was already inside it, invisible except for her feet. And Lily was handing Diane cushions one at a time, narrating each one with a detail I couldn't fully hear, but that made Diane nod seriously at every single one, like each cushion's individual characteristics were deeply relevant information. Diane looked up when I came in. She read my face the way she sometimes does, not intrusively, not like she's looking for something to worry about, but like she just wants to know if the person in front of her is okay. It's the kind of attention that used to unnerve me when I first noticed it, because I wasn't used to being actually looked at. Now I was starting to understand it wasn't something she chose to do. It was just the way she was built. I gave her a small nod that meant I'm fine, it's handled. She gave me one back that meant, okay, I believe you, and then returned to accepting cushions from Lily with full gravity. I sat down in the armchair across the room and watched them for a while without saying anything. Just watched. And I thought about what Daniel had said. She stayed longer than usual, moved faster than usual. I thought about the 14 pages on the kitchen table. I thought about the brooch in its glass case and the logs on the security panel, and the specific coldness of someone who had made a study of my absence. And then I thought about Diane sitting on my floor accepting couch cushions from my daughter like it was the most important thing happening anywhere in the world right now. Which, from where I was sitting, it was. There's a version of this story where I spent those weeks consumed by what was coming for Camille, where I tracked the case, pushed for updates, made Daniel call more than he needed to, refreshed my email waiting for news that she'd been served. I understand that version. I understand the appeal of it. When someone has done something like that to you, not just the fraud, not just the forgery, but the whole long architecture of it, the patience of it, the way she'd used my grief and my absence and my inability to see past the glass I'd put between myself and everything, the appetite for watching it unravel can feel like the only honest thing. But here's what I actually did instead. I sat in that armchair and I watched my 3 daughters build a structurally indefensible pillow fortress with a woman who made too much pasta on purpose so she'd have a reason to come over. And I stayed there in that room fully, without my phone and without the reports and without the glass, because that was the thing I could actually do something about. The rest was already in motion without me. Valentina emerged from inside the fortress eventually, completely disheveled with a cushion crease across one cheek and the serene expression of someone who'd just completed an important expedition. She walked over to my armchair, climbed up without asking, and sat on my lap with the casual ownership of a person who sees no reason to announce what already belongs to her. "Daddy," she said, looking at the fortress with professional assessment. "I think it needs more pillows on the left side." "I think you're probably right," I said. She nodded and didn't move to go fix it. Just sat there against my chest, warm and solid and completely at ease, watching Sophie explain the left side problem to Diane, who was listening with her head tilted at the exact angle that meant she was actually listening and not just performing it. I put my arm around Valentina and I stayed there. It was a Thursday when everything started moving faster than I'd planned for. Not dramatically faster. Not in the way that makes you grab the edge of the table and brace. More like the way a tide comes in. You look up and realize the water is already at your ankles and you don't remember it getting there. That's the thing about real consequences. They don't always announce themselves. Sometimes they just arrive, quiet and inevitable, and you find yourself standing in them before you understood they'd reached you. I was in the car, coming back from dropping the girls at school when my phone rang through the speaker. Unknown number, international prefix. I almost let it go to voicemail. I don't know why I didn't. Some instinct, some pull I can't fully explain, made me tap the green button. Is this Ryan Hartwell? The accent was European. Precise. Clipped. The kind of English that sounds like it was learned from textbooks and then polished through years of boardroom use. It is, I said. My name is Georg Brenner. I am the head of legal affairs at Vantage Capital in Zurich. I apologize for calling directly. I have been in contact with your attorney, but I wanted to speak with you personally before we proceed to the next stage. I pulled over. Not because I legally had to. I was already on a quiet residential stretch. Barely any traffic. I pulled over because I wanted to be still for whatever this was. I appreciate that, I said. Go ahead. He paused for exactly 1 second, the pause of someone who has delivered difficult news many times and has learned to give the person on the other end one breath before it lands. We have located a second contract, he said. I didn't say anything. Signed with your name, same forged signature, with a different firm. A private equity group based in Frankfurt. This contract predates ours by approximately 8 months. The structure is identical, consulting engagement, market entry framing, similar retainer amount. That firm did not contact us. We found them during our own internal investigation when we began tracing the contractor's professional history. I was looking at a stop sign through my windshield. Red. The specific red of a stop sign on a clear morning when the light hits it, and it looks almost too bright to be real. Are they pursuing action? I asked. They are now, he said. We put them in contact with your attorney this morning. I understand there may be others. We are still looking. Others. I turned that word over once. Others. Meaning Camille hadn't just done this twice. Meaning the pattern Daniel had described. Different cities. Different men. Same architecture. Had a longer history than even he'd traced in the 48 hours since I'd called him. Mr. Hartwell, Georg Brenner said, and there was something in his voice now that wasn't quite sympathy but wasn't entirely professional either. Somewhere in between. The voice of a man who had seen enough of human behavior to know when someone on the other end of a phone is processing something significant. I want you to know that it is very clear to us and will be very clear to any court that you are a victim in this matter. The forgeries are not the work of someone trying to implicate you. They are the work of someone trying to use you. That distinction matters, legally and otherwise, I thanked him. IQ. We agreed that all further communication would go through Daniel. He gave me his direct line anyway, which told me something about the kind of man he was. Then he hung up, and I sat in the parked car on that quiet street for a few minutes, with the engine still running and the heat going and the radio off. Others. I thought about Camille at my dinner table. The way she used to sit, always slightly sideways, one elbow on the table, like she was ready to turn toward whatever was most useful in the room at any given moment. I thought about how I'd read that as confidence back then. Ease. The settled quality of someone who knew who they were. Now I understood it differently. It wasn't ease. It was orientation. She was always triangulating, always knowing exactly where she was in relation to everyone else at the table and what each of them represented. I'd been the main asset in the room. Everything else was scenery. I also thought about something that took me a little longer to get to. Something I didn't want to look at directly, but that was there whether I looked or not. I had not been the first, and I had not been the last. If she was already operating while we were still together, there was at least one overlap I didn't know the name of. I had been one stop in a longer itinerary. And somehow that was worse than being targeted specifically. Being specifically targeted means you were seen. Being a stop on an itinerary means you were a category, a type. The widower with the name and the network and the grief that made him easy to keep at a distance from himself. I drove home. Rebecca Holt was already there when I pulled into the driveway. She came on Thursdays for Lily's session, and she had this way of arriving that I'd noticed over the weeks. Always 5 minutes early, always parked in the same spot, always sitting in her car for exactly those 5 minutes before she came to the door. I'd asked her about it once, half joking, and she'd said, "I use it to transition. I don't walk into someone's home still carrying the last one." I'd thought about that answer for longer than I probably should have. She was just getting out of her car when I pulled in, and she gave me the short nod that was her version of a greeting. Not cold, just economical. Rebecca Holt did not use 10 words when 3 would do, and she did not perform warmth she didn't feel. It was one of the things about her that I'd found uncomfortable at first and had come to rely on in a way I hadn't fully examined. "You look like you got news," she said, not as a question. "International call," I said. "Turns out the situation is bigger than I thought." She tilted her head slightly. She had this quality of listening that was different from most people's. Most people listen with their face, making expressions that show you they're tracking it. Rebecca listened with her whole body going still, like she was clearing all the frequency so she could actually hear. "Bigger how?" she asked. I gave her the short version: second contract, second firm, potentially more. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "How are you carrying it? Not how do you feel about it? Not that must be so hard. How are you carrying it?" Like it was weight that existed, and the question was about the mechanics of how I was managing it, not whether I was allowed to feel burdened by it. "Steadier than I expected," I said honestly. She nodded once, like that was the correct answer and she was logging it. Then she said, "Lily's been doing something interesting in our sessions this week. She's been narrating things, not just answering, narrating, describing what things look like, what they feel like. It's a very good sign." She paused. "I thought you should know that before you go in." I stood there in the driveway for a second with that information sitting in my chest like something warm. "Thank you," I said. She nodded again and headed toward the front door, and I followed her inside. Lily was in the living room with one of the nannies, and when she heard the door, she looked up with that careful look she had, the one that checked and confirmed and then settled. She saw Rebecca, and her face did the thing it does now. The small opening like a window being cracked. She stood up. "I found a new rock," she said to Rebecca, completely matter of fact. "It has a white stripe all the way across it. I think that means something happened to it a long time ago." Rebecca crouched down to Lily's level. "What do you think happened to it?" Lily considered this with complete seriousness. "I think something pressed on it really hard," she said. "And it changed, but it didn't break." Rebecca looked at her for a moment. "That's a very good theory," she said. I had to look away for a second. I went to the kitchen and stood at the counter and looked at the window above the sink and breathed in the way you breathe when something hits you, somewhere that doesn't have a name. Something pressed on it really hard and it changed, but it didn't break. 5 years old. 5 years old, and she just described every person in this house in one sentence about a rock. I made coffee. I listened to the murmur of Lily's session from the other room. I thought about Georg Brenner in Zurich and Daniel running down a list of names and cities I'd never been to. I thought about Camille, wherever she was, going about her Thursday, not yet knowing that the ground had already started shifting under her. Daniel called me on a Monday morning with 3 words that I hadn't realized I'd been waiting for until I heard them. "She's been served." I was standing in the kitchen, ending. The girls had just left for school, and the house still had that particular echo that comes right after a door closes. Not empty, just suddenly aware of its own size. I had a dish towel in my hand from where I'd been wiping down the counter, and I just stopped moving entirely. The way you do when something you've been bracing for finally arrives, and your body needs a second to understand it doesn't have to brace anymore. "Both firms?" I asked. "Both firms," he said. "Vantage filed Friday. Frankfurt filed this morning. Process server reached her at her apartment at 7:42. She signed for both sets of documents simultaneously." He paused. "I've also been informed by the forensic team that they've identified a third name. A real estate developer out of Boston. His situation is slightly different. The fraud there was structured as a partnership agreement, not a consulting contract, but the signature forgery is from the same hand. His attorney called me this morning. He wants in." Three. 3 men. 3 cities. 3 forged signatures, all built from the same careful study of the same original. I thought about her sitting somewhere with a pen and a sample of my handwriting, practicing the H, practicing the R, getting the angle right, doing it over and over until it was close enough to pass a quick glance. I thought about the patience that required, the specific cold, disciplined patience of someone who had made this into a system. What happens now? I asked. Now it moves through the courts, Daniel said. The criminal exposure on the forgery charges alone is significant. We're talking multiple counts across 2 jurisdictions. Add the fraud and the wire transfer elements and she's looking at years, Ryan, not months. And that's before the civil suits, which all 3 of you are entitled to file separately. The civil side is where the financial damage happens. She's going to lose everything she has and then some. I set the dish towel down on the counter. Outside the kitchen window, the sky was the color of old pewter, flat and even, the kind of sky that doesn't promise anything one way or the other. I don't need to do anything, I said. The affidavit you signed covers your end. I may need you for a deposition further down the line, but that's months away at minimum. Right now? No. You don't need to do anything. After I hung up, I stood in the kitchen for a long time without doing anything in particular. Not celebrating. Not feeling the satisfaction I'd imagined I might feel when this moment came. Just standing there with the quiet and the pewter sky and the specific stillness of a house that had been through something and was still standing. Here's the honest truth about that moment. It was smaller than I expected. Not in a disappointing way, in a clarifying way. Because the version of this I'd imagined back when I was angrier, back when the 14 pages were still fresh on my kitchen table, and her name still made my jaw tighten, had involved something more dramatic. Some scene where I was present for the unraveling, where I watched it happen. But the real version was me standing in my kitchen in a house that smelled like the breakfast I'd made for my daughters an hour ago, holding a dish towel, getting a 3-minute phone call. And that was right. That was exactly right. Because the whole point, the thing I'd finally understood, was that it wasn't supposed to be about her anymore. It was never supposed to have been about her. She had been a detour. A long, damaging, expensive detour that I had made easier by being absent from my own life. But a detour is not the road. She was not the road. I finished wiping down the counter. I rinsed the coffee pot. I moved through the kitchen doing the small, ordinary things that kitchens require in the morning, and I let the news settle into me the way things settle when you're not fighting them. It was Diane who called at 10:30. Not about any of it. She didn't know about the serving yet. I hadn't told her it wasn't hers to carry. She called because Sophie had left her library book at the house over the weekend and needed it for school that afternoon. I can drop it off, Diane said. I'm heading that way anyway. I'll bring it to the school, I said. I was going to stop by there anyway to drop off some permission slips. There was a brief pause, not awkward, just the natural pause of 2 people adjusting to a small logistical overlap. You sure? She said. I'm sure, I said. Another pause. Then, how are you doing today? She didn't know about Daniel's call. She was asking the way she always asks, the way that isn't a formality, that actually waits for a real answer. I'd learned not to give her the default fine. She never said anything when I did, but something in her expression, even over the phone I could feel it somehow, went a degree quieter. The way someone goes quiet when they can tell they've been handed a performance instead of a truth. I got some news this morning, I said. The legal situation, it's moving, she was served today. The silence on her end was the particular silence of someone who is fully present in it, not filling it, not rushing to respond, just there. How does that feel? She finally asked. I looked out the window at the pewter sky. Smaller than I thought it would, I said. In a good way. She made a sound that wasn't quite a word, a small, soft exhale of understanding that meant she'd heard exactly what I meant. Then she said, I'll have the book by the door. I drove to her place to get the library book. I could have just had her leave it outside, but I didn't. That's the truth of it. I could have arranged it any number of ways that didn't require me to go to her door, and I arranged it that way anyway. She answered before I knocked. She must have heard the car. She was wearing an old gray sweatshirt with a paint stain near the left cuff. From the weekend, she'd helped Sophie work on an art project that had gotten, in Sophie's words, more ambitious than originally planned. She was holding the library book and a coffee that she handed me through the doorway with the same matter-of-fact ease she does everything. "You didn't have to make me coffee," I said. "It was already made," she said. I stood in her doorway holding Sophie's library book and a coffee I hadn't asked for, and I looked at her for a second. Just a second. And something shifted in my chest that I'd been aware of for weeks but hadn't named because naming it felt like adding weight to something that was already carrying enough. "Diane," I said. "Ryan," she said, not unkindly, not deflecting, just meeting the tone of it, level and patient, the way she meets everything. "I don't know how to do this part," I said. "Not the legal part, not the Camille part. This part. The part I was standing in right now, at her doorway, with the paint-stained sweatshirt and the coffee, and the way she looked at me like I was actually there." She leaned against the doorframe and considered me with those steady eyes. "You're doing it," she said. I didn't have anything useful to say to that, so I didn't say anything. I just stood there a beat longer than was strictly necessary, and she let me, and the morning held us both in that doorway without asking us to be anything more than what we were in that exact moment. I left with the book and the coffee and something I couldn't name that sat in my chest the whole drive to the school. Something that felt like the opposite of the glass. Something that felt like just barely just beginning. Like standing on actual ground for the first time in a very long while. I dropped off Sophie's library book with the front office. I handed in the permission slips. I sat in the parking lot for a few minutes before driving home, watching two teachers cross the lot with coffee cups and a shared conversation I couldn't hear. Easy and unhurried the way people are when they're not performing anything for anyone. Camille was somewhere in the city with 2 sets of legal documents and whatever that morning looked like for her now. I had thought at some point that I'd want to know, that I'd need to picture it, her sitting with those papers, reading the charges, understanding what was coming. But sitting in that school parking lot, I realized I genuinely didn't care what that scene looked like. I didn't need it. The knowing was enough. The knowing that the ground had shifted and that I hadn't been the one who had to shift it. What I cared about was the coffee that had already been made, the paint stain on the left cuff. The way she'd said "you're doing it" like it was the most obvious thing in the world and also somehow exactly what I needed to hear. I didn't plan to be there. That's the first thing I want to say about that day, because if I frame it any other way, it sounds like I was the kind of man who shows up to watch someone get destroyed. And that's not what it was. Daniel had mentioned the preliminary hearing date weeks earlier, in the same tone he uses when he's relaying logistical information. Neutral. Factual. Filed away for reference. He hadn't suggested I attend. I hadn't planned to. The whole approach up to that point had been exactly that. Step back. Let the process work. Don't make it about you. But then Marcus forwarded me an email on a Wednesday afternoon, 3 days before the hearing. And the email was from a business journalist at a financial trade publication based in New York. The journalist had been tracking the Vantage Capital case and had, through the process of doing exactly what journalists do, connected it to the Frankfurt firm and to the Boston developer, and to a pattern of fraudulent consulting contracts that she was writing about for a piece on financial fraud, targeting high-net-worth individuals. She wanted a comment from my firm. I forwarded it to Daniel. He called me back within the hour. "She's going to run the piece regardless," he said. "The question is whether your name appears in it as a passive victim or as someone who cooperated in making the pattern clear. I'd recommend the latter. It protects you and it's the accurate version." I thought about it for less time than I expected to. "Set it up," I said. The interview was the next morning, 40 minutes on the phone with a woman named Sarah Kowalski, who asked her questions with the focused, unhurried precision of someone who had done a lot of research before she dialed. She already knew most of it. She was filling in the texture, not the facts. I told her what I could, what Daniel had cleared, and I kept the personal parts, the girls, Diane, all of it, where they belonged. Off the record and out of the piece. At the end she said, "One more thing. The preliminary hearing is Friday. Will you be there?" I said I hadn't planned to be. She said, "The other 2 men are attending. I'll be there. I think you should know that." I thanked her and hung up, and sat with that for the rest of the day. I went. That's the whole decision, and it took me until Thursday night to make it, not because I wanted to see Camille's face. Not because I needed the closure that people talk about like it's a thing you can retrieve from a room if you show up to the right address. I went because Daniel was right. There was an accurate version of this story, and I was part of it, and disappearing from the accurate version because it was uncomfortable was exactly the kind of absence I'd been trying to unlearn. I wore a gray suit. Not the kind I wear to closings or board presentations, one of the older ones, the kind that fits like something you've already lived in. I drove myself. I didn't tell Diane. I dropped the girls at school the same as any other Friday, Sophie lecturing Valentina about something I couldn't follow involving the rules of a game she'd invented. Lily in the back seat with her window cracked 2 inches, her hand flat against the gap like she was testing the air. "You okay, Dad?" Lily asked when I pulled up to the school. She'd been doing that lately, asking in that direct, undramatic way that had nothing to do with anxiety and everything to do with genuine noticing. She just saw things. She'd always seen things. It was the quality I'd missed most when she'd gone quiet, and the one I was most grateful for now that it was back. "I'm good," I said. "I'll see you this afternoon." She looked at me for one more second with those accountant's eyes. Then she nodded and got out. The courthouse was 40 minutes away, downtown, the kind of building that exists to remind you that the systems we've built to manage human wrongdoing are slow and impersonal and completely indifferent to what any particular person feels about being inside them. I found parking 2 blocks away and walked. The air was cold and direct, the kind that clears your head whether you want it to or not. Daniel was waiting outside the entrance. He handed me a coffee without saying anything, which was its own kind of language. We went in together. The other 2 men were already in the hallway outside the courtroom. I'd never met either of them. The Boston developer was a man named Patrick Greer, broad-shouldered, late 40s, the kind of face that looked like it had spent a lot of time outdoors and not enough time sleeping. He shook my hand with a firm, brief grip and said, "Ryan Hartwell, I know your work." The Frankfurt situation had involved a man named Carl Desmond, who was attending by video. His attorney was present in the room, a compact woman with reading glasses pushed up on her head who introduced herself and said, "We've been looking forward to this," in a tone that was both professional and quietly ferocious. We didn't talk much in that hallway. There wasn't a lot to say that wasn't already documented in the filings. We were 3 men who'd been used in the same way by the same person, and the only thing we had in common besides that was the fact that we were all there. Camille arrived with her attorney 8 minutes before the scheduled start. I saw her before she saw me. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically. She was exactly the same height, the same build, the same deliberate posture she'd always had. But something about the context stripped the scale from her. In my house, at my dinner table, in the architecture of a life she'd been studying for 14 months, she'd had a kind of size. Here, in a courthouse hallway with fluorescent lighting and her name on a criminal complaint, she was just a person who had made a particular set of choices, and was now in the building where those choices were being accounted for. Her attorney was speaking quietly in her ear. She was nodding, looking at the floor, and then she looked up and she saw me. I want to be honest about this part too, because it would be easy to describe that moment as something dramatic, as a reckoning, as the scene where it all comes full circle. But it wasn't like that. It was 4 seconds, maybe 5. She looked at me, and I looked at her, and I didn't feel anger or satisfaction or the complex grief of someone confronting a person who hurt them. I felt almost nothing. Not the nothing of numbness, the nothing of someone who has already done the work of understanding what happened and doesn't need this moment to finish it. I was already finished. This was just the formal part. Her attorney redirected her attention. She looked away. I went into the courtroom and sat down. The hearing itself was procedural in the way that preliminary hearings are. Motions, filings, the judge reviewing the charges, Camille's attorney entering a not guilty plea in a voice that was professionally neutral and exhausted at the same time. I sat in the gallery beside Daniel and listened to the charges read out loud in the flat, factual language of legal documents. And I thought about how strange it is that the worst things people do to each other get described in court in the same tone you'd use to read a terms of service agreement. But then something happened that I wasn't prepared for. The prosecutor, a young woman with a dark braid and the kind of organized energy that made it clear she'd been waiting her whole career to have a case this clean, stood up and requested that the court consider additional charges related to an ongoing investigation into 2 prior incidents in separate states. She named the amounts, she named the years, she named the men, and the room went quiet in the specific way that rooms go quiet when something lands that's bigger than the space was ready for. I watched the back of Camille's head. I watched the exact moment her shoulders changed, not dramatically, not visibly to anyone who wasn't looking directly at her, but I was looking directly at her, and I saw it. The slight forward drop, the way her chin came down half an inch, the posture of someone who had been holding themselves together through the architecture of their own performance for so long, that when the performance finally stops working, the body doesn't know how to hold itself up without it. It was not satisfaction what I felt. It was something quieter and more permanent than satisfaction. It was the feeling of a thing being named correctly after a long time of being described wrong. Sarah Kowalski was in the row behind me. I heard her pen moving. I left before the hearing wrapped up. I didn't need the ending. I already had it. I walked out through those heavy courthouse doors and back into the cold air, and I stood on the steps for a moment looking at the street, at the ordinary Friday morning world going about its ordinary Friday morning business. And I breathed in and out twice, and that was enough. The article ran on a Tuesday. I didn't see it first. Diane did. She texted me at 7:18 in the morning while I was making lunches. Peanut butter for Sophie, turkey for Valentina, and for Lily, the specific combination of cream cheese and cucumber that she'd decided 2 months ago was the only acceptable midday meal and had not wavered from since. With the calm conviction of someone who has found a truth and sees no reason to keep searching. The text just said, "Have you seen it yet?" I hadn't. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and pulled it up on my phone right there at the counter with 3 half-made sandwiches in front of me, and the girls still upstairs doing whatever the girls do in the 17 minutes between when I call them for breakfast and when they actually appear. Sarah Kowalski had titled the piece "The Name on the Contract." It ran in the financial section with a photograph I hadn't known she'd taken. The courthouse steps, from a distance, 3 men standing in the cold outside the entrance. Patrick Greer on the left, me in the middle, Daniel just visible at the edge of the frame. We weren't posed. We weren't looking at the camera. We were just 3 people standing outside a building in gray morning light, and somehow that image, exactly because it wasn't arranged, said everything the headline didn't need to. She'd written it clean and without drama, which made it hit harder than drama would have. She named the firms. She named the amounts. She named the pattern, the architecture of it, the patience of it, the specific method of identifying men with names worth borrowing and building relationships designed to extract those names. She named Camille Whitmore, who was facing multiple counts of forgery and fraud across 2 international jurisdictions, with a 3rd jurisdiction actively investigating. She quoted Georg Brenner from Vantage Capital. She quoted Patrick Greer, who said 3 words that I read twice. She studied us. And she quoted me, 1 line that Daniel had approved, that I had chosen carefully, that said exactly what I meant and nothing extra. The forgery was the least of what she took. I stood at that counter for a moment with my phone in my hand and the sandwiches unfinished, and the house quiet above me in the way it gets right before 3 small tornadoes descend the stairs. I thought about what it costs a person to be named in print. Not me. I knew what it cost me, and I'd made that choice with my eyes open. I mean her. I thought about Camille Whitmore waking up that morning and finding her name in a financial publication that every person she'd spent years trying to impress would read before 9 a.m. I thought about the specific quality of that. Not the legal consequences, those were already in motion, but the social ones. The world she'd constructed her identity around seeing exactly who she was, in print, with amounts and dates and the word fraud in the same sentence as her name. Permanently. Indexed. Searchable for the rest of her professional life and beyond it. I didn't feel triumphant. I want to be clear about that because I think people expect you to feel triumphant when something like this lands, and I didn't. What I felt was something closer to tired, not exhausted, just the specific tiredness that comes at the end of something long and costly. When the effort finally stops being required and your body realizes it's been running on adrenaline and stubbornness for longer than it knew. Sophie came downstairs first, hair still in the loose braid she slept in, dragging her backpack with the energy of someone who is not a morning person and has never pretended otherwise. She dropped into her chair, looked at the sandwich, looked at me. "Is that the crunchy peanut butter?" she asked. "It's the crunchy peanut butter," I said. She nodded and picked it up. That was breakfast. Valentina arrived 40 seconds later at full operational capacity, already talking about something that had happened in a dream, which she was narrating with the detail and urgency of a breaking news report. Lily came last, as always, quiet and unhurried, carrying a book she'd been reading since the weekend that was slightly too advanced for her age, and that she was working through with the patient seriousness of someone who has decided a thing is worth doing and sees no reason to rush it. She sat down. She looked at me. That check, that quiet accounting. Still there, still hers. "You're different this morning," she said. "Good different or bad different?" I asked. She considered this with genuine deliberation, the way she considers everything. "Just different," she said, like something got lighter. I looked at her for a second. 7 months ago, this child hadn't spoken a word. Now she was reading my emotional state at breakfast with the casual accuracy of someone who has been paying attention to the people she loves for her entire short life, and has gotten very good at it. "Yeah," I said. "Something did." She opened her book, and Valentina kept narrating the dream. Sophie ate her sandwich with the focused satisfaction of someone whose morning requirement had been met. And I stood at the counter in my kitchen, in my house, in my actual life, and I finished making the lunches. Daniel called at 9:30 with the update I'd been expecting. The article had generated significant attention in the financial community. 2 additional men had contacted his office by 8 a.m., having read the piece and recognized the pattern from their own experiences. He was referring them to their own counsel. The prosecutor's office had called to flag that the new contacts could substantially expand the scope of the charges. Camille's attorney had filed a motion that morning that Daniel described as optimistic to the point of being fictional. The civil suits from all 3 of us were moving forward simultaneously. "She's going to lose everything," Daniel said. Not with satisfaction, just as a factual projection the way he says everything. The apartment, the accounts, whatever she's built. The legal fees alone will exceed her assets within 8 months at current trajectory. And that's before the judgments. I thanked him and hung up and poured myself a second coffee. Here's the thing about justice, and I've thought about this a lot since all of it happened. We talk about it like it's an event. Like there's a moment when it arrives, decisive and complete, and you feel it land and then it's over. But real justice, the kind that happens in actual life, not in the movies, is slower and messier, and a lot less satisfying in the moment than you expect. It's 14 pages of documents. It's an affidavit on a Tuesday morning. It's a prosecutor's braid and a pen moving in a courtroom gallery. It's an article that runs on a Tuesday and gets read by people who will remember the name Camille Whitmore the next time someone with her particular skill set tries to borrow theirs. It's not a thunderclap. It's an accumulation, just like everything else that actually matters. I drove to Diane's place at noon. I hadn't planned that either. I'd told myself I was heading to the office, and then I took a left where I would have taken a right, and I was parked outside her building before I'd made a conscious decision about it. She came down when I texted. She was in the paint-stained sweatshirt again. I was starting to think it was just a permanent fixture of who she was, which I found inexplicably comforting. And she had a thermos of coffee that she offered me before I'd said anything, and I took it. And we walked half a block to a small concrete bench in a patch of what the neighborhood was generously calling a park. And we sat down. "The article," I said. "I know," she said. "It's done," I said. "I mean, not legally. That'll take months. But the part that required anything from me, that part is done." She wrapped both hands around her own coffee cup and looked at the middle distance for a moment. At a pigeon that was doing something inexplicable near a trash can with the total commitment of a creature that has no self-consciousness whatsoever. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Like I want to stop talking about it," I said. "In a good way. Like it's behind me enough that I don't need to keep facing it to know it's there." She nodded once. Then she looked at me sideways in that way she has. Not a full turn, just a slight angle, like she's checking something at the edge of her vision. "Ryan," she said. "Yeah," I said. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. Not romantically, or maybe it was. I stopped trying to categorize it a while ago. She said it the way you say something that has been true for a long time, and you've decided it's time to say it out loud. I looked at her. At the paint stain on the left cuff. At the stillness that was never blankness. It was always the opposite. The stillness of someone fully, completely, undefensively present. "I know," I said. Camille Whitmore was convicted 11 months later. She lost everything. Her name is now the kind that comes up in certain circles as a cautionary word. That's justice, or as close to it as real life gets. Diane is not my housekeeper. She hasn't been for a while. What I'll tell you is this. The coffee is never too strong. Lily saves her the best rock she finds each week. Sunday mornings, she makes too much food on purpose. If you're reading this behind your own glass, running your machine, telling yourself that providing is the same as being present, I'm not going to tell you it's fine. It isn't. But it's not permanent, if you're willing to stop treating your own absence like a fixed condition of your life. The door is in the same hallway you've been walking past. You already know which one. Open it.